It's coming off the window.
All right. What's going on, everybody? I am here with the guys from the Network Age podcast. This is the first Other Life Network Age crossover episode. We are going to be talking today about this whole FTX fiasco. We're going to be talking about Mr. SBF and all the craziness surrounding, the collapse of FTX right now. And so, I want to start off with, there might be some people in the audience who are not, super into crypto. I know there's a lot of people in my audience who are maybe curious about crypto, but not necessarily deep into it. So probably most people now have heard about this massive fiasco, which is probably one of the craziest things to happen in the entire history of the crypto industry so far. But a lot of people might not know the basic details. So I think we should just start with a little bit of a recap. You guys can chip in if you think I'm missing anything, but at a very high level, basically, for those who are, maybe only just heard about the headlines vaguely, this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, was basically one of the most trusted, high visibility, kind of respected figures in crypto. He's a young guy who made a ton of money, billions of dollars, relatively quickly. There was a lot of really interesting and impressive kind of origin story to his rise. He was quite famous for conducting what is sometimes called the kimchi arbitrage, where he was basically moving Bitcoin back and forth from the U.S. to Japan and Korea. Supposedly made millions doing that. Turn that money into a successful trading firm. Tim, you could mute yourself if you want when you're talking. No big deal.
I'm sorry. You can mute yourself when you want.
Yeah, and so turn that into a successful trading operation called Alameda Research. Alameda Research then spun out into a exchange called FTX and built this kind of massive $1 billion kind of brand and entity and company. And he was basically the whiz kid, the guy who was seen as the blue chip founder, the person you could trust in this shady sea of sketchy scammers and con artists. He was the one that all the VCs and all of the institutions kind of had the most faith in and the most trust in. And lo and behold, not too long ago, it turned out, and we can get into some of the details, but it turned out that essentially what it looks like to most observers right now is that at some point, it looks like Alameda Research got screwed in similar ways as other companies that went under. But instead of going under, what they did was they pulled money from customer deposits in the FTX exchange to kind of cover over some holes that they had at the time when a bunch of other firms were blowing up. And that explains why Alameda did not blow up. Only recently did this kind of become exposed. Another exchange owner, CZ from Binance, kind of tweeted some, vaguely accusatory tweets and mentioned possibly selling the FTT token. The FTT token was one of the main holdings of FTX's assets at the time. And so the price plummeted, which meant that all of a sudden FTX became insolvent. There was basically a run on the exchange and FTX could not meet customer deposits and everything kind of spiraled downward from there. Is that an adequate summary of what's going on for people who maybe don't know anything about this story, or are there any kind of key points anyone here would add to that before we get into the juicy questions about what the heck is really going on and what it means?
Yeah, well, you're forgetting the polycule, right? That's
there's a lot of context.
Yes. A lot of context, but at a high level, the main story. Is there anything essential that you would add that I did not mention, or that I got wrong?
It sounds like you're trying to give the main story from the sort of before the crash happened perspective without the benefit of hindsight. So I think that's good to do. I would, in order to complete that story, I would note that there was a pretty big divide. So you gave the general opinion of SBF. I think there was a pretty big divide within the kind of, more idealistic hardcore crypto community, even prior to the crash, to the point that there was a lot of schadenfreude once shit started to go down because people didn't like him. And it was and interestingly, I think people didn't like him for exactly the same reason that kind of VC types and I don't even know what to call them. There's sort of this normie investor type who essentially the kind of person who loves Stripe, who will just wank all day about how amazing the Collison brothers are, right?
So easy to use.
Whatever. Stripe is a great business. But as far as we know, the Stripe crash is going to be even better.
Yeah.
But that type of person really liked SBF for the exact same reason that I would say more crypto maxi purists, and I say that in a very positive way, didn't like him, which is that he didn't like crypto that much and didn't believe in it in any sense, and also that he was selling shovels, to people mining for gold. And so, and I would see the sentiment explicitly. Like I've seen these kind of, we'll call them the stripe types afterwards, like literally writing that I trusted SBF specifically because it seemed like he didn't go for that crypto stuff. He was just there to make money, right? Which to us, or at least to me, sounds horrible, but to them it sounds sort of like, okay, you're on my side, you've seen through this whole game, and you're doing the responsible thing of, just raking in these transaction fees on top of it and selling these, idiot degens shovels. So I guess I would just finish that by saying that. And the other one is the other part is that SBF, no matter where his reputation was, prior to a couple months ago, people started to think he was a massive snake. He was explicitly lobbying DC and the SEC in particular to regulate DeFi pretty obviously so that FTX could try to, get this privileged position. And I don't think anyone who's serious about crypto in any way really liked that. It was extremely sketchy, underhanded. And I don't think I think at that point people thought he was a serious operator who was dangerous because he could get that through. Not that he was a total degen, as it turned out. But people didn't like him, to a large degree.
Right. Okay. So we're starting to get into some of the colorful details here. Yes, he was basically becoming a pretty ambitious political operator. He was the second biggest donor to the Democratic Party in the recent election, and that's saying quite a lot for someone who just quite recently became quite wealthy. And so other colorful details, like Bitchel alluded to, include the fact that the FTX was being run out of a mansion in the Bahamas, where he worked with someone who he formerly dated, allegedly, Caroline Ellison. Caroline Ellison also worked at Jane Street previously, where Sam Bankman-Fried also worked previously. Jane Street, for those of you who don't know, is one of the biggest trading firms out there, basically, kind of old school institutional trading firm. And so they both came from that kind of avenue historically, and they're living in a house with a bunch of people in the Bahamas. And the other colorful detail is that they were effective altruists. Okay, and this is something I've talked about a fair bit in the past, so it's kind of like a running discussion point, if you will, in the Other Life content empire. Here we tend to stand virtue ethics a little bit more than effective altruism, and that may or may not be important. Actually, I think it's actually more important than you might think. Bern Hobart actually wrote a very good piece a few days ago on FTX, and he actually kind of takes this seriously and talks about how you really can only understand SBF's kind of economic strategy, his economic bet making. You only really can understand it through a utilitarian or effective altruist lens, and so I take that actually quite seriously. So I think, okay, those are kind of the most colorful additional moving parts that I think people need to be aware of, just to download quickly the main story and its fascinating, colorful details. So let's talk a little bit about. I want to get your guys' viewpoints and opinions and angles on what's most interesting or important here. I want to start by asking you about the political story, because it does seem like not a coincidence that he was, a massive Democratic Party supporter, that he was the guy in crypto who was most dedicated to, basically regulating DeFi in a way that would benefit centralized exchanges such as FTX, and at the disadvantage of decentralized exchanges. And so, what do you guys think is going on with SBF and FTX politically? What, is the conspiracy theory is that he's, basically maybe he's a CIA plant, or maybe he's a Democratic Party plant. Maybe, he was there from the beginning just to kind of bring just to bring crypto into the clutches of the government. I tend to not like conspiracy theories, and I generally don't sign off on very many of them. I do think, though, this is kind of an interesting angle that is kind of hard to, you have to at least think about it. So what are you guys thinking about on that front?
I think, my problem with conspiracy theories is I think they just always assume that the government, if it involves the government, is smarter than it is. It's just always hard for me to imagine that the people in power are not as retarded as they've shown themselves to be over and over again in executing some of these plans. And I think that like to the degree that there's any truth in this is like, his SBF's parents are, Stanford professors. He comes from, MIT. He's in this world. Like if there's a conspiracy, it's the normal conspiracy of rich, highly educated people who know each other, helping each other out and working for each other's interests, which is like bad, but it's nothing particularly new or exciting.
I could expand on that, and like I sort of agree and expand, which is that
like improv, right?
Exactly.
We're just riffing, baby.
We're just, he very clearly sort of likes to play games and thinks of things in terms of like playing games and like doing well in them, and he's very familiar with the mechanics of aspects of like the political game and how it can be used because of his parents' background. Also, I think for our listeners who don't know, Jane Street is kind of like the Navy SEALs of like autistic people. Like so, in the same way that like everybody who's like sort of military adjacent has like a story about how they almost got into the SEALs but dropped out on like the last day. Everyone who's basically has like a high IQ and is good at math has a story about how they got to like the final round of Jane Street and then like was kicked out. I have one of those. Some of my other friends from like school do. And so he was like at the top of that, and he was very, very good at it, and it's very much like a finance as a game. Again, no criticism of that. Very smart people, and so I think that he sort of had this almost, I guess you could call it like innovation, where he understood at a pretty young age how a lot of the political pieces fit with the financial pieces and the regulatory pieces, and was trying to like maneuver all of those very explicitly. I guess like that does answer your question though, which is to me it looks a lot more like a very smart kid stimmed up on trying to maneuver himself into a high place in that hierarchy, as opposed to like the CIA blessing him to like take down crypto. Like the former explanation just seems a lot more parsimonious to me.
Yeah, I don't think there was like a grand conspiracy there necessarily. I think like obviously he did have very good connections that I think kind of related to his ability to kind of lobby. Like he was in front of Congress very quickly. So he was able to kind of be that figurehead of like, responsible crypto, which is sort of, hilarious in hindsight. But that's where he had positioned himself. And I think his understanding obviously of the political environment helped there, but also the way he set up, his hedge fund, the fact he was able to use his own token from his own exchange as collateral, the way he was able to use that to then make really large impact purchases across crypto. He was clearly like savvy to the mechanism and how the sausage worked. I'm not sure who extended that line of credit though. Right.
When you talk about responsible crypto, that also makes me think that I think he found some product market fit with the fact that regulators were looking for some angle into regulating crypto. And so having this kind of like walled garden that people are using in high numbers, and where this guy's like pushing you to like regulate DeFi so they can use his thing, that's appealing to a section of like the government. So again, I think it's pushed by him, but there was like, there's some pull as well where there's parts of like, the SEC and some people in Congress who are receptive to that.
Well, the government, they want to make money. They see crypto and they see money moving back and forth. And I don't think it's actually in their interest, once they realize how big the cash cow is, to go and cut off the milk. They just want to get their piece. And if Sam Bankman-Fried is the guy who's gonna let them in the door and let them take a cut of everything, then of course they're gonna love him, right? And it makes perfect sense why Sam Bankman-Fried wanted this, and it makes perfect sense why people in the government would want to get their grubby little hands in there. Everyone's acting like as you would expect, I think.
So, I mean, do you guys think that this is the story of a young man who kind of just got drunk on power and money and made some foolish, unethical decisions, and then things kind of got carried away? Or do you read this more as like, this is a hard-boiled sociopath who sought to maximize power and control and dominance from the beginning of his rise? Like, how do you read it?
Is there a difference in those things? Like, I just don't know. I might be too much of a sociopath to see the difference.
Well, I mean, maybe it's impossible to know, and maybe it's not a productive question. But to me, this is kind of one of the fascinating, juicy questions right now, which is like, just like to what degree was this his plan all along? Where it's like, I don't care about crypto values. I don't care about decentralization. I don't care about freedom. I don't care about any of these like values that are associated with crypto. I just want to basically make as much money as possible, get as much control as possible, because I'm an effective altruist and I believe that it's necessary to donate my money to malaria nets in Africa or whatever.
No,
Yeah.
I think that was. I think I think also it seems, at least my current working hypothesis is that it was very much a game for him, and very often the people who can make the most money like tend to treat it as a game, like it's very useful for him. And I think the effective altruism thing was very likely like everyone has to have an answer for what do I do once I have like $50 billion. Well, not everyone, but people who try to get $50 billion need an answer for that. And I think it was sort of to some degree his kind of like MacGuffin. For some people, it'll be like, I'll establish a familial dynasty, or I'll like, do lots of like, build lots of libraries. And his kind of MacGuffin for the money and the power was I'll, make this like altruistic impact, is my impression,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, to the degree that anyone believes anything they say, I think it's always, hard to figure it out, right? Once your actions start converging on what you're saying, from what direction it's coming, hard to tell. But I do think that if you buy into the idea of effective altruism, that the most good you can do is by making money and donating it and giving it to good causes, then your highest responsibility is to go make more money at whatever cost, right? And the values of crypto are secondary to the value that you create by amassing more wealth and giving it to the right causes.
Right.
Though
Yeah.
I don't think that necessarily is mutually exclusive with this being a smart kid hopped up on amphetamines who got in over his head. I think that those can be happening at the exact same time.
Should we talk about the Alexander the Great thing? Like, I've been there.
Was he on Adderall?
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Adderall of like battle. But like when things go well for you in a string for a while, particularly when you're young, it's very hard to find evidence that you're not God, like quite literally, or that like the world is not a simulation, like controlled fully by you. So if you're like, however old he is, like late 20s, and you've just had this like string of wins, and Alexander the Great was a similar age, you quite literally start to believe either, that you're God or that you have this very special power over the universe, and like the stimulants definitely like don't help to disabuse that, nor does like the glowing like profiles or billions of dollars.
Right. Yeah, for sure. It's essentially a video game, and you are better at it than anyone else in the world. And the video game also happens to have the control of the world downstream of it in a way. So it's like his calculation, I think, is if I can just, if I can just bend the rules slightly, momentarily, and get away with this, well, then I'll just buy the government next election. Basically, it's like that's part of the thinking, right? It's like
And I'll make it better, for everybody while I'm doing it, because I'm so generous. I'm going to spend my money.
Which seems like such a weak narrative. The whole like I'm going to give like billions of dollars to some cause. It's like when you just think of it in terms of like. Who's actually implementing that money? How is it being spent? Like this, it's such a weak narrative.
Well, it's the most.
You're anti-charity, is what you're saying. We should all hoard.
Well,
I'm anti just like completely hands-off charity. I'm like very pro like what Carnegie did, building all the libraries.
I'm deciding whether to dunk on you or to like steelman you. So like Jesse already did the dunk. So yeah, the steelman is basically I think there is something like aesthetically very bland and like concrete building about it. Like I'm gonna make all this money and then I'm gonna hand it off to like the various like bureaucrats at these like other charities, and it's gonna sort of like filter through. There's at least something a little bit lifeless about it aesthetically, even if you like the results of what the charities are doing.
Okay, so one of the interesting questions I think also here is the strategy with respect to kind of the international legal ramifications and the jurisdiction. So one of the themes of the Network Age podcast, for those of you listening who have never listened to the Network Age yet, you talk a lot about the decentralization of power around the world, the becoming mobile of power, and the way in which in the Network Age, different jurisdictions are going to be competing for capital in kind of increasingly exciting and dynamic ways. it's not at all clear that the U.S. is going to, win that race. In many ways, the U.S. is kind of backwards on a lot of these issues at the moment. And so you guys talk a lot about places like El Salvador and domiciling companies and DAOs in other places. Are there interesting observations you guys have on that front here? Of course, FTX was domiciled in the Bahamas, I believe, but then there are interesting, strange things where they filed bankruptcy in the US, I think, or something like that, which surprised some people. So I'm not an expert on this, but I know you guys pay attention to this sort of stuff. Nilran, you especially, I know you follow the legal developments pretty closely. I know from talking with you. Are there interesting observations or comments to be made here in this regard?
It's really interesting to contrast FTX and Binance, and I can't speak for Binance's custodian of their clients' funds. I have no idea how that's actually working. I saw that CZ had announced that they will show sort of proof of reserves. So that's cool. I think that's nice to have some transparency. I think that doesn't actually mean a ton though. I think Tim, you had mentioned, you had tweeted out that the ease of moving the funds is so simple in crypto that it doesn't really matter that much if it's in cold storage 1 second. It might move very quickly. Right. But contrasting those two, right, FTX and Binance, and their approaches, right, FTX was very much let's try to nerf DeFi, let's take a US regulatory approach, and Binance has been consistently saying we're not headquartered anywhere. It's one of the first companies in a very long time to say that, right? We're not headquartered anywhere, and they go around the world and they're trying to find a jurisdiction. They've been talking to Singapore. There was an announcement about a free trade zone in Nigeria that they were negotiating, and then also they were in
turned out to be a scam.
Yeah, probably some prince wanted to offer them a principality within Nigeria, but they were also negotiating with El Salvador. CZ was meeting at the presidential level here in El Salvador, and so they're very much in this kind of where can we kind of jurisdictional shopping in a way that I don't think FTX was. Of course, their ex-US was headquartered in the Bahamas, but they had a very US focus with kind of where they were lobbying, kind of how they were thinking about it, even who they were targeting, doing Super Bowl ads. So I think there's a really interesting contrast there between Binance and FTX.
That is an interesting detail. I like that comparison. But I guess one question I would have for you guys, if you happen to know, is if Sam Bankman-Fried is this kind of power hungry, super ambitious, Alexander the Great kind of mentality, then wouldn't he have engineered the legal matters and the legal structures behind FTX and Alameda and how these things are connected? Wouldn't he have engineered them in such a way that if things were to hit the fan like they are right now, he would be maximally legally insulated? It doesn't seem like he did that, or did he?
Well, so, man, I actually wanted to get back to a point earlier, but just to answer that, I mean, we can't separate the situation from the amphetamines. And I think people sometimes have this impression that if someone's American and knows how the American system works, they'll be sort of super sophisticated. And one thing people forget is there's just a lot of people in America doing really shady stuff and just sort of YOLOing really hard and sort
That's
of thinking
the American
either
way.
Nothing. I mean, it honestly is, especially, even maybe in contrast with Europe, although you can find that there as well. So I'm never that surprised when someone gets in deep and does that. And I don't think it sort of invalidates they're going for power. They just think no one's going to find it. And it was almost right. But going back to the network age aspect, I actually, when you asked that, I'm starting to find SBF actually pretty interesting as kind of a proto network age power lord, where he's actually if you look at what he did, he didn't go through necessarily the traditional do a startup and go through the long thing and then exit it. He did it explicitly in crypto because that provided a very rapid path. It also had something that regulators were interested in. So there was sort of something to trade with them. There were also cool narratives. And essentially he's building this completely digital power base that he could run from anywhere. It happened to be the Bahamas. And sure, he made this slightly cringe move that was maybe too early or too ambitious to try to use that newly acquired power to take over the US government, which is that's a big power play. And maybe he would have gotten really far in it. I don't know. He was doing pretty well in his speed run of going to the top. But I do think that playbook, and then you could look at CZ as doing a much more methodical, slower version of it, but that could end with CZ effectively like owning a country or like exercising power over multiple countries because of just the sheer, not just the amount of money, but the fact that the money's flexible. It can go to anywhere. It can be like injected when you want it. I think there's like a lot to learn for those of us who like are interested in like acquiring power in the network age from SBF, both positively and negatively.
Let's go. So how do we fill the power vacuum that SBF has left open now? How do we fill it in a way that's ethical and sustainable and is not going to get got?
I mean, I'm probably too much of a pansy to do his strategy, which is to like, explicitly just sort of go for the gold right away, like, take over, like, lobby the SEC. Like frontal assaults are hard. Like, I think that if you go the C's, like, so one really interesting thing, Nilrun, I forget the exact number, but we were talking about this the other day. If you look at Binance's market share, like in crypto, it's insanely high in terms of just how much of
the highest, like the next second place was 1/9 the market share.
Yeah, so they have like something like 70% of the market share while completely eschewing the US, and not in like a haha you can use a VPN way. You can't use Binance if you're in the US. And so he's like, rather than doing a frontal assault, doing this like very careful, methodical approach that very much has him out of jail. He doesn't try to visit the US. Like it probably, actually SBF mocked him for, I think, not being able to visit the US in like a tweet right before the Untergang. But like, I think there's, as he like builds that up, there's still the opportunity for him to do an SBF type thing. So I think if you see him be able to, Singapore's tough, they're really wealthy, and they sort of like almost outsize him and also have a strong military. I think there's countries like, various Latin American ones like El Salvador that are looking for crypto where he might be able to make a strong entrance just by providing so much of like, an economic engine or lobbying.
Do you guys have angles on this? Or, I mean, let's game it out. Like what would you do if you were hypothetically going to build the vehicle that would fill the power vacuum, take over a country or take over the world right now? Like what, where do you domicile the company? What are you building? Who are you talking to? What kind of alliances? Like how much Adderall do you need?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much Adderall CZ's on. I think I agree with Timlek where like he is doing the right approach. I think Binance like is the correct one to study, like because like they're not in a rush. They can basically put each jurisdiction against each other and keep hitting them for like the best deal possible. And as crypto's market cap goes up, CZ becomes more and more powerful. So,
but isn't Binance in some kind of unspoken partnership with the Communist Party though? That's like part of the secret sauce, is it not?
Ooh, scandal.
I could be totally wrong.
I have to check your sources.
Yeah.
I think I always was under the impression that CZ was more in the like sort of Chinese diaspora like kind of thing where he's not like doing the like explicitly sort of not doing the China enabled part as much, but I could be.
Okay, maybe that's a rumor, or maybe I just misheard, or I'm not well informed at all.
I would expect that rumor regardless of whether it's true or not, so I can't like speak to it. Again, maybe some of our listeners will show me like really compelling documentation. But I'm like, I get your question, which is not just sort of this raw thing of power, but how do you game that out? What steps do you start taking? I mean, the first thing I would start doing is I would try to start. Well, so first of all, they don't domicile anywhere, which I think is like a really smart first step, like to always be a free agent. And what you want to do then is not domicile somewhere, but start giving jurisdictions like something. So I would want ones that like are sort of strong enough to be able to like physically protect me militarily, like in some sense, but mostly just that they're small. Like, so not unless like you can't go to like, whatever these like tiny like 10,000 person countries or whatever you find some like tax jurisdiction, but like a few million people where you can make like a real dent in it is what I would be looking for, where you find, again, I would just be looking for like either jobs or income or attracting things there. But then you're going to want to like, I mean, seriously, I would probably start building up like private military capabilities that you could like, lend out to like different countries and organize. That's always a little bit tricky, but at a certain scale,
you take your yield in Blackwater soldiers.
Yeah, exactly. Just like the staking yields go directly to mercs.
Well, actually, I mean, no, Ron, were you about to say something? Sorry, it looked like maybe you had something.
Yeah, I would just say like to that point, you need to like have your own. You need to be secure in your own person. So you want to lock that in. That's like really, and that's like not that dissimilar from like a drug lord, right? like if you look at some of the Pablo Escobar type takeaways, like you want to do some of that, but while not being explicitly legal. So there's no strong state that can really hit you. So you want to have enough personal protection, enough security that, it would take a lot of state resources, and also ideally don't piss off that state with enough capacity to hit you in that position.
Yeah. It's fascinating, this dimension. It makes you kind of wonder what he's doing right now. Isn't it an interesting question? Like, how is he going to play this? Like, is he going to try to abscond? Is he going to try, like, how do you guys have a read on like what's going to happen next, or is it just too hard to?
Is SBF just sitting in the Bahamas right now?
I think there was a false story, or like there was a rumor that his plane had absconded to Argentina or something like that, and then I think he testified that like, not. Yeah. So I mean, is there any way that he like basically gets away with this by, I don't know, amassing an army or private security? Or I mean, I kind of think the John McAfee story is kind of interesting in this regard. Like, right, like he could maybe go on the run. Obviously, John McAfee would not be he was not as wanted as SBF probably would be, right? So how does this cash out?
Money
you think
anymore? Like so much of that money.
Well, I don't know. So another detail for people listening who don't. Yeah, so for people who are just tuning into the story, another detail is that after all this happened and FTX imploded, suddenly it just turned out that FTX was hacked, allegedly, and all of the funds in the FTX like admin wallets were drained. And so obviously the allegation or the assumption that people make is that and apparently there's some kind of backdoor in the code, right? Where like apparently the code was such that SBF could move money out of the exchange funds into personal funds without that being tracked or visible to auditors, apparently. So if that's true, again, this is all allegations. It's all like waiting to shake out. But if that is true, that would be some of the most stark evidence that, in fact, this was like a pretty sociopathic power play from the get-go, right?
Totally, yeah. Like if it is true that SBF like had that backdoor put in there, has taken the money, I think that it's pretty difficult to read him as someone who just got in over his head, or maybe this is just, it's still continuing to spiral out, and and he looks unwell, and maybe in his head he thinks this is the only way to do it. He's gonna get that he's gonna hack that 500 million, give away 499 million, and then spend the rest of his life in jail.
Yeah, he could. Well, I don't know. I mean, he could have personal
frantically
funds.
like doing transactions to charities before like the feds come in his
He could have substantial personal funds, and he could decide to go on the run, or he could decide to do some kind of crazy, right? Because if he is such a kind of motivated, power-hungry, strategic thinker, willing to make really, really big bets, no matter the downside, then it stands to reason that the next move in this story could be like he does some kind of next play to try to get out of this or something. I'm just kind of, maybe not, but I'm just curious if your minds go to anything there.
The thing about him, yeah. Well, I was gonna say, like, the thing about him being on the run is that supports being premeditated. He's got such a distinctive hairstyle that I don't think if he shaved it, I would be able to recognize him. And in that way, that's maybe a smart move to set yourself up. You're in your head, everyone's head, with this Jufro, and you shave it, you grow a goatee, and I think no one can pick him out anymore.
Yeah, it's fascinaning.
Blended.
Okay.
I mean, who's that bald man with breasts who looks like SBF without a fro?
Yeah, why is he drinking so much Soylent? Yeah, like this is exactly what you don't do, right? You've now like defrauded 1 million U.S. consumers, so like the U.S. basically has to go after you. This is exactly what you don't want to do in the network age thesis. Like you don't want the U.S. like basically obligated to go after you. That's what
you
like
can only
CZ's
defraud
done
like
really
Bangladeshis or somebody, people who aren't gonna
like honestly, legitimately, like obviously you shouldn't defraud anyone, but like to that point, like you can't like CZ by not defrauding Americans, by actually cutting all Americans. Like I was doing the VPN using Binance, right? And then my account was shut down because they're like, you KYC'd with a US passport or driver's license, I forget which. And so like they've put themselves in a position where they can't really end up pissing off very powerful countries directly in a way that kind of has a clean narrative where it's like the US is going after you because you stole funds from 1 million of our citizens. So you want to
by the same token, and I think this was what Justin was getting at with the original question. I also, haha, there we go. I also don't yet see CZ's path to power, because like a big part of power is that you also have to be able to sort of broker things, and people have to be need to need you in some sense. And so he hasn't really done enough yet in that regard. Whereas like just as again as a proof of concept, SBF was very much going for, if you want to do crypto, finance, like you have to go through FTX if you're in the US. Like he was sort of going for that angle. And there's like all these other pieces that you have to put together. Like I think people jump way fast to the personal security, private army stuff and miss the whole part about, okay, why do people even care about, let's again, we stay on CZ, but still like CZ, like there's a lot of billionaires in the world. And it's one thing to be that, and it's another thing for people to sort of like need you to be like the on ramp to something is like this whole other part that you would want to like start working out with your jurisdictions of choice or online jurisdictions of choice is sort of a whole other thing. Like maybe the play you do if you're him is like you find a way to like, I don't know, as a crazy just wacky example of the kinds of things I'd be looking at, like buy Twitter, take it private, and like move it fully offshore. So it's like sort of like this like now this like internet free for all that you're turning into like this crazy Web 2 platform with crypto. I mean, that would be interesting. That's the kind of thing Elon can't do because of the direction he's taking it. But I would actually start looking.
Just wants to be wanted.
Exactly. But I guess this actually, I think people when they think about getting power in the network age, they jump too quickly to thinking of how do I take over like physical properties and jurisdictions, and that's important for your personal safety. But what I would really be looking at is how do you take over the most important digital properties that are seen as like unassailable. Like I would probably, revealing my inner sociopath, I would probably start it with the thought experiment of you take sort of this crazy unimaginable goal of like what would it take for me to take over Google, and also sort of rip it out of like its US context, and you play through that, you see where that goes, and then you start seeing, okay, what are some targets that are one notch below that that might be assailable, or that I like can create. Is there a digital property I want to create that cuts those out?
Yeah, I like that in that Saudi Arabia, for example, has a ton of money, and they're having trouble having physical power. Like they still rely on the US for security in a big way. They had tried to sort of pivot to like a Russia-China alliance. Then Russia obviously can't export weapons currently, so that kind of ruins the whole physical play that Saudi Arabia was going for.
They also can't do digital plays. Like their money isn't good there. They're like end up like indirectly investing through SoftBank in order to buy private companies at massively marked up valuations. Like exactly. Like you get
it's
your
rough.
money is good for buying WeWork.
That's tight,
so
though.
listing out the core digital
private kingdom
assets and pulling them is
Private
really
WeWork
interesting. Yeah.
I'm just imagining like MBS, visiting each of his WeWorks and as sort of a Yertle the Turtle thing, looking over everything I can see in this WeWork.
Just being another glass of kombucha, sir.
Oh, Evan, every WeWork has a torture chamber in the back.
Yeah.
What were we going to say, no, Ron?
Yeah, just I think target those digital assets and also think ahead. This is something we talked a little bit about before we started recording, Justin, but think ahead to 2030. What are the new digital realms that are emerging? Right now, crypto is still relatively small. It's around $1 trillion market cap. So it's still pretty small, but kind of think ahead. And I think that's something that's really great about this FTX crash is it's okay, we probably can't trust centralized exchanges, even if they're showing they have the reserves today. It's just way too easy for a hack that occurs, 600 million, 500 million's gone. So I think it's a huge boon to DeFi. It's also a huge boon to Urbit and that entire play. So I think we need to start planning more ahead to all right, what does it look like in 10 years? Where are we trying to get to? How decentralized is it?
Yeah, that's great. So let's move into the future then, because as I said at the beginning of this podcast, this is probably, if not definitely, one of the craziest things that's happened in the crypto industry to date, just because, like I said, SBF was seen as a blue chip figure. FTX was seen as the blue chip exchange. It was one of the very biggest in the world, and it imploded overnight due to the founding team being apparently quite sketchy and not trustworthy. And so this is just basically puncturing so many people's core narratives, essentially. I mean, there are many VC firms that have boosted FTX and SBF that were ultra confident in SBF and FTX, and pretty much everyone, all of the institutional players, all of the kind of big, well-known marquee brands in VC and the emerging crypto industry were super bullish on FTX and SBF, and it turns out that they were all wrong. And so this is very likely going to be a massive watershed. But the interesting questions are all about, what comes next and to what exactly is this a watershed? So let's talk about that a bit.
Well, let's just start with one important thing, which is that at its core, like they're all investing in FTX. It's like, going, hockey stick. Like, it's not that interesting a product in the sense that a world where FTX like wildly succeeds is not a very different or very interesting world. And I think that's relevant because and with what we were just talking about with digital properties in terms of what you're trying to acquire or build and where your power base is coming from, like all of these funds, like both what SBF himself is building and what these funds are investing in, it doesn't really, take you anywhere different. So I think that we can move to like what's next in crypto, but I think that if like what this is really the end of is like it's sort of like the last gasp, in my opinion, of like trying to like squeeze some more water out of the crypto stone without having to produce anything new. Like, Bitcoin was a big deal. Smart contracts like were a big deal. We've like, so I think things like in layer 2s are very cool, but we're like pretty close to the end of like, the institutions are going to buy our bags kind of thing. And we just need some like, good platforms for them to trade on. Why are they trading there? Like if like nothing's actually happening, who knows? But like, let's like make that happen really efficiently.
Well,
yeah, that's a great point. Oh, just real quick. So for people listening who are not that deep into crypto, might just bear going over that FTX was a centralized exchange. So what Tim is referring to is the fact that the FTX as a product is not actually even really crypto. It's just a software. It's just a piece of a very normal web software that in a centrally organized way connects buyers and sellers of crypto assets. So compare FTX, which is a centralized exchange, to something like Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange. Something like Uniswap is new and interesting and kind of remarkable that you can have a trading platform. You can have an exchange that is just a totally decentralized piece of software, a protocol that sits there with no, CEO deciding what happens, but a team of people governing it, a massively distributed team of people governing a piece of software that does all of the trading and the market making itself. That's, a decentralized exchange, something like Uniswap. That's interesting and new. FTX is really just this old school system, a centralized exchange, and that's what Tim Luck is referring to. So that's something for people to understand. That what failed here is not actually crypto exactly. And certainly not DeFi. What failed was trust in a human being to provide an old school service that was basically a scam. So that's what failed. And interestingly, that's not even really crypto.
Well, and just to finish that thought, it's not even like using sort of this trad service to unlock some particularly interesting thing like use of crypto. It's just like, making trading more efficient and letting you do some like, futures. It lets you make different types of bets about like the direction of crypto. It's not unlocking new capabilities that will like drive its fundamental value.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And Tim, look, this goes to something that we were sort of talking about earlier, and I wrote an article that I'll probably publish later today that was sort of making a similar point, is that for all the talk of all these people who lost a ton of money, and I'm very sympathetic to those people. I certainly didn't see the FTX collapse coming. I don't think even people who disliked FTX or saw it coming for the most part. But I was saying that most of the interesting, smart people I know in crypto were not really affected by this because the interesting people were not on FTX because FTX isn't interesting, right? It wasn't actually creating new value or holding to the values that are interesting about crypto, decentralization, democratization, for whatever that buzzword is worth. There's no ingenuity. And so in terms of answering your question, Justin, about what does this mean for the future of crypto? I actually think the answer is very little on a sort of long enough timescale, because FTX was never the future of a crypto that really succeeds and reaches its potential. It had one foot in this old world, and anything that was really going to transform crypto from a speculative, like dog coin money printing pump and dump business to something that we are using on a daily basis to unlock new types of human connectivity and new use cases. That was always going to be completely separate from FTX, and the people who are building those things are still building them.
And let's like even clarify for our listeners even more when you're saying that like FTX wasn't enabling anything really cool or transformative to be built. We're not just like saying that I don't know, this like super crypto maximalist view. It's not hard to conceive of like sort of a Web 2 type project that even, you know, maybe the Stripe cucks like love that does like
Stripe.
Look, if you spend enough, I've sort of immersed myself in that, like, you know, alternatingly like horrible and interesting morass of like the way traditional investors, like traditional sort of tech investors, think about things, just to like, you know, get in bed with the enemy. And yeah, they love this like sort of, you know, execution. You know, you're doing something like user go up, but I think like to steelman their position, it's not hard to imagine a company like, I mean, I think their stated ambition for something like Replit is to integrate crypto to their thing and unlock new possibilities for that as an operating system in much the same way like that Urbit wants to do. And in a new article I'm writing, I'll mention that briefly. So we'll see who gets the clicks. Out. But yeah, just like I think I think that FTX wasn't trying to do anything interesting for crypto, and so interesting people in crypto were not interested by it.
Do you guys think that though this is going to trigger a massive shift towards things like, you know, hardware wallets and preferences for decentralization? And is this not going to make people just more eager and committed to more sovereign forms of activity, whatever the case might be? I mean, to me, I feel like that's a logical expectation, right? It's like so many people have gotten burned in the past few months from having their money on exchanges. You don't think that's going to make people say, okay, from now on, I'm getting more serious about, you know, my own sovereignty when it comes to this stuff? You don't think so?
At the margin. Like at the very margin, that matters. But like when you're talking about something that, you know, eventually you want broad adoption, I don't think the issue for hardware wallets was that like people sort of are like on the fence of which to use. It's much more binary. Like the people who are into them like use them, and the people who don't. And there's a small margin that doesn't. So I think that the thing that will drive it is supply and not demand. I think there'll be a tiny bit of extra demand for that stuff, but supply has to be increased in terms of like much better like user experience, which takes like real work. It's not just like, I think people sometimes think of user experience as like, we should tell everyone that we should have good user experience in crypto. Did you know that there's bad user experiences in crypto? But like, there's like real technical work that has to be done.
Sure, that experience got much better, you know, over the since crypto has been around, like over the last 12 years, there's been a massive improvement just with hardware wallets versus, you know, generating your own paper wallet. So like that continues. I think having like your Urbit wallet, having, you know, having Uqbar, having Lightning integration, having obviously the Bitcoin wallet on your Urbit. I think there's like a lot of, I agree. I think it's mostly supply. It's like the product needs to get better. Maybe like a tiny % will move their funds off Coinbase, but keep in mind like Mt. Gox, right? That got hacked. That was a huge deal. And like people still had massive amounts of crypto on centralized exchanges subsequently. Like Coinbase still custodies a lot of crypto. So yeah, I think the services for consumers need to get better to really shift that.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I guess from my perspective, it seems to me that this is just going to basically deflate so many of the dominant kind of narratives and conventional wisdoms that circulate right now around crypto. And it's kind of like, to me, in a way, and not to make light of it, I know a lot of people have gotten really wrecked, and I don't mean to be glib in any way whatsoever. But I do think for
glibly.
No. You're making me laugh now, but
idiots.
No. I just think so. Yeah. You know, I'll pour one out for the homies who lost a lot of money, and I really do feel for you. But I think on the other hand, also, this feels to me really bullish for all of the people who are building actually really visionary shit in crypto that is all about decentralization and self-sovereignty, because, you know, there was for a while, for the past several months, there was kind of this feeling of like, is crypto really just going to be like, these big dominant incumbent companies building Web 2 front ends, and the old big VC firms just moving into crypto and staying on top in crypto? It kind of felt for a while, it was like, these certain really naive, simplistic conventional wisdoms were hardening. A lot of the incumbents were just like moving over in this very superficial way, positioning themselves to continue being incumbent in what ought to be like a revolutionary upheaval. So for a long time, things felt very, almost like underwhelming and almost boring or mundane. Whereas now it feels to me like everyone we thought was on top is maybe no longer going to be on top. And everything that people thought was certain, all of a sudden, no one's going to believe that. And in fact, people are going to actively be rejecting that which was seen as conventional. And on the other hand, all of those kind of dark horses in crypto, which a few months ago, people were kind of like, nah, I don't think that could ever work. All of a sudden, people are going to be like, oh, maybe that's going to be the new blue chip. So obviously, I'm kind of thinking about Urbit here. I feel like this is really bullish for Urbit because in my perspective, it's like the past few months, Urbit has kind of always been like the dark horse of crypto, like a really visionary, promising, exciting thing that a lot of the smartest people behind closed doors will say, yeah, this could be the future. But for some reason, it never got hype. It never like kind of picked up in the narrative. It never got like mainstream, appeal or hype. To me, it feels like the perfect setup for Urbit because it's like, this is showing that FTX and things like FTX were way overvalued. So therefore, maybe all the things that were, not hyped in the past few years are going to be the new hype. And that's the thing where the real action is. That's what it kind of feels like to me. But what do you guys think?
Do you want me to like sort of agree with that and then pick it apart? Like
whatever you think is interesting.
Yeah. I'm trying to think where to start with that. So I agree that it like one of the best things about it that is that it just burns down everyone who had a reputation, and a lot of people had a reputation because like they made a lot of money, and now the money's gone, so that's nice. But also you feel this like freedom to not have to respect them. Even FTX before it, you had to be like, well, I don't like SBF, but like you got to give him credit. He's a damn good trader, and like it's like now you don't have to do that. And the same goes for these like fucking retard funds like Multicoin with like Kyle Samani like posting his retardation nonstop, and like they're just like wrecked. Like we don't have to like worry about them. They all go into like the EOS bucket like forever. It's awesome. So I think people are sleeping on how I feel like I'm like bankless here. Like people are really sleeping on how bullish this is, David, like for crypto. And like, but I really do think that it like feeds ambition like very heavily. Because like now this whole new group of people can like it feels like just everything's like clear. With regard to Urbit specifically, for prior events, we would like for Tornado Cash, we would get advice like this is Urbit's moment now. You have to show how it's like decentralized Discord or something like that. And it's like it was these very small time things, and I think this like complete like just cutting everything down, burning it down, like, salting the fields. It feels like Urbit now, and in particular things like, that I'm working on, like Ukbar, where you can go like, where you're integrating, crypto natively into it. It feels like you can just go for the full vision. Like, you don't have to say like, oh, maybe we do some like decentralized like front ends for DeFi apps. It's like, no, we're building an operating system to orchestrate crypto so that we can have the interesting applications that like are the only way we can get out of this bear market. And whether I'm right or not, obviously I'm sort of overly biased thinking I'm right because I'm an optimistic founder type. But whether I'm right or not, there's going to be other people thinking the same thing for their projects. And some of them are going to be right. And they're also going to have like oxygen to take. So it's going to be this combination of, on the one hand, like further effort, further energy, further ambition. And on the other hand, like sort of room for that ambition to do something because everyone's like desperate, like, like Ryan's just like looking around for how like David can find someone to pump their bags, and like there's no one to be found.
Perhaps we need another young, charismatic founder to step in and take the reins. That never goes wrong.
Well, I think we need dozens of those. We need like this, like for everyone out there, basically who feels like they have hiding inside of them, an Alexander the Great type figure. Now there's this power vacuum. Everyone out there who's been like on top is totally shown to be swimming naked. So it's like if you feel called to be an Alexander the Great type character, now is your chance to come out of nowhere, work hard, learn Hoon and go all in on Urbit, because Urbit is going to be the vehicle. I mean, what do you guys think about this? Am I just like, is this just wishful thinking, or do you guys agree? Because it feels to me like over the next few months, people are just going to be super down on crypto. Everyone is going to be like, there's already people, crypto skeptics taking victory laps saying like, oh, I told you this is all fake. It's all going to zero. This is over. Crypto industry's dead. There are a lot of people saying that. And I think that that's going to be a common conception for the next several months. And I think people are going to be really low on it, really skeptical of everything, really pessimistic. But then what's going to happen, I think, is really head-turning shit is going to come out of Urbit, like real applications being built on things like Uqbar that you can actually see people playing with. You see users actually doing cool shit on Urbit with crypto that you can't do anywhere else. And the proof is going to be in the pudding. It's like, this is a new thing. This is a new paradigm. This is about sound computing and about seamless execution with novel crypto applications. When that starts coming out of Urbit and people are seeing it, seeing users using it, I think like that's going to be, in my opinion, the most likely kind of narrative to kind of bring crypto back from the dead that it's currently in. Am I just like, is this just wishful thinking, or do you see something similar, or how do you think it's going to play out? Yeah.
I think it's more than just crypto, like there's a lot of just like black-pilled people across the board. Like I know in like when kind of the original Web 0 talks, that there were kind of that discussion, right, about just like where are, like, people feel like tech is stuck. Right. So this idea that just like tech is stuck, and I think Urbit's going to have a huge impact on crypto, but also on the broader, the way that people view technology. And I think that's why it's like so important to really like just think ahead to what Urbit will deliver. And like, it's already delivering some of it, but there's so much more coming down the pike where it's just like, okay, you actually, it's like what you did, Justin, right? Where you got the Page app built in a day, and then like you could start crowdfunding apps really easily, and then all the users in the community could use an app. And you could crowdfund that using crypto, and you could do that off of like a poll, like the Holium created their poll app. So just like that experience of just like connecting communities to capital, getting them to actually be able to make changes to their experience, then improve the way they're interacting. Like there's so many narratives that Urbit can win on. Like I was chatting with Rob for last night about this, just like, yeah, obviously there's the computing you own, but there's also just like a dev experience that's really easy, that you can, build an app in a day and not have to spend a ton of time maintain it. It's easy to ship it. Obviously Uqbar is doing Urbit as sort of the crypto operating system. But there's also just this idea that like monopolies will get crushed, and that like, in the future, you're not going to have just like one Twitter, because the back end is divorced from the front end that way. When, you fork Twitter and create a new front end for it, you don't have to tell everyone to move over to this new app. It can still be backwards compatible. So I think it's just like this idea that like we've been stuck with monopolies in tech for so long. It's been really kind of just like soul crushing, where you're just like, okay, there's like one app, there's no ability to really change our experience with it. So I think we just need to like really, these narratives are like, they're strong, and now there's like apps and actual development that's sort of backing up each of these narratives, and it's moving forward pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think to the degree that like people are down in crypto and like looking at what the next narrative is going to be, I do think that what eventually will turn this around is like a useful application layer, something that extends beyond just finance, which is appearing to be more and more smoke and mirrors. And so like Urbit's in an interesting position because I'm relatively new to it in the grand scheme of things, but even like a year ago, Urbit would not necessarily have been ready for this moment. And it's in the last couple of months, we've seen a ton of development coming out to make the user experience better. Things like Realm and Scene are coming. Uqbar's testnet launched, and we're getting closer and closer to having, real usable crypto apps there. Even something like, Justin, what you put together to have buying a planet and getting hosted be a one-click experience. At the very least, I think Urbit is putting its best foot forward to take advantage of this moment, and it's starting to be in a position where you will have really concrete stuff to show people. And I guess so. In that way, I agree with you. To how quick this is all going to happen, I'm not sure, but I think that what will make Urbit win when it does is really concrete use cases and a streamlined experience for both developers and users. And that's going to be a process. I don't think that this happens overnight because everyone is sad about FTX. But I do think that Urbit is well positioned to be a big player in the next narrative.
I think Urbit's ready to be talked about. Like, I think it's ready to fuel a narrative.
We're doing it.
And I think like a year ago, right. Well, I think that there's enough there to show people that you can actually start having an interesting narrative. And that's more important than you think right now, because one big problem in tech in general is everybody is really bored. Like, valuations are all down. Nothing is interesting. Fundamental computing experiences haven't changed much. Crypto got kind of stuck. Software is like not as fun for like the people building it. It's like for the people using it, it feels like it's been a while since there's been magical new experiences. Like, to the point where whenever someone describes a magical new experience, it's some like 5% better SaaS product or something. Like, that's wowing them. And so I think at the very least, what Urbit can do right now is it can be in this like almost, I don't know, early DeFi position, like in like the 2019, 2018 bear, where people are building stuff and it's cool. It's not quite out there. Like, not everyone's like using it yet, but you can like get excited about it for where it's going to go. And that gives it a little bit of room to like grow into. And I think the growing into is getting really close. And so I think like we're sort of in this phase of the narrative where we want to, you know, probably show some of the cool options for applications that could happen. Then, you know, maybe cycle back to what developers can do in unlocking that, and actually show people some magical new stuff. And I realize the irony of doing it on this pod where we're like not doing that yet. But it's like, it's very soon. And I think we're ready for this moment after the FTX grieving period ends.
Yeah. Tim, you alluded to before this meme that was really dominant for a while, this idea that the institutions are coming. This was like, you know, for months, for many months, it was like everyone who was into crypto was kind of like, you know, it was like daily, you know, checking CoinGecko and looking and checking the news, like, have the institutions come today? Like, are they coming? Like, are my bags going to pump when, you know, whatever, like the big banks join or whatever.
I can steel man that. So the way that narrative all goes is, in the last bear market in crypto, you had like the Bitcoin standard come out. People got really into the idea of this almost like teleological money, where it's sort of like, because of its attributes, it's like predestined to take over the world. It's very attractive. And even like once COVID happened and everyone went to like, you know, risk on and trying to like, you know, outrun inflation in assets, you know, even institutional investors were starting to do that. Like, it was real. Bitcoin's price like was going up. And I think the version that people were thinking is, okay, like, we might not have stuff we can do with this yet, but let's just like see if we can get, you know, $10 trillion of like, you know, outside wealth into crypto and have that like sort of stay there and then innovate on it. There's like, you know, clear paths we can do. Maybe, you know, okay, we'll do DeFi with wrapped Bitcoin, or ETH will go crazy and then we'll be able to use that as like, you know, the base in here. And I think what's been taken away, and obviously then the combination of like, you know, the Fed kind of crushing risk on assets and people sort of getting disillusioned with that inflation hedge narrative. And then just sort of the general like stagnation and not having all that money in there to play with and to like build on. That's mostly taken that away. And I think maybe there's an alternate timeline where that happens. I don't know. Like, maybe we're in the darkest timeline, but in this one, like, we're going, for whatever reason, we're going to have to like sort of, you know, as like Mitchell was saying a second ago, like, finance for its own sake doesn't feel very interesting, because finance isn't that interesting unless you have like, you know, something backing it that you're like doing stuff with. If it's just sort of there, as it has been in crypto, that's not very interesting. And, you know, we're not going to have the option of like just doing the finance and then building everything else. We have to build the stuff. And so I think that's what's mostly died. And when people on, you know, your crypto Twitter timeline, I'm assuming everyone here is just like hardcore into crypto Twitter, I don't know, are talking about, you know, I hate the industry, or the industry will take years to recover, or all that. Pretty much what you should read that is the kind of fast path monetarily, where $10 trillion plus like gets in and then we innovate after that. That path is probably closed off. So it's very bad for them who are like, you know, holding large bags or like wanted to go. For people who are more on the technical side, it's probably good because you essentially get your power at lower valuations if it works out for you.
Yes. Yes.
But
yes.
yeah, it's harder for them.
I think that's a great point, and I think that drives with what I was saying before. I see that as well. It's like if you have energy and ambition and some skill and hard work, but you don't currently have a big bag in crypto, this FTX fiasco, I think, is a really good thing for you comparatively. Whereas, like, if you're an old school bag holder, a dominant player in an industry that was like before well positioned to kind of cash in on the institutions coming, if that was your game and that was your bag and you had capital or cultural capital in that context, then obviously things are looking very grim for that type of person comparatively. But I think most of the people who listen to my podcast, and certainly myself as well, I kind of identify with that first category that I think is relatively advantaged by this massive fiasco. So I think for listeners of the Other Life podcast, this is mostly a really exciting opportunity. Crypto is like new again. It's like things are more open. Narratives are way more open. Uncertainty is much higher, which, like, if you're a thinker or a creator or building something new, that's like the best kind of context. You want uncertainty to be high. You want narratives to be unsettled. You want everyone to be looking around. Yeah.
The problem, though, is that like half of your listeners are going to be like, yeah, but I don't know if Urban's like actually going to make it. And like crypto is like pretty down. So maybe I should like be doing this other thing. And like it'll go like that. And then what'll happen is like at some point it will become very obvious either that Urbit or something similar will work, or that like, some innovation has happened that makes crypto, go again. And then they'll, buy back in too high, both in terms of money and investing their time. And I definitely did that in the last cycle. Like I was definitely probably in the sort of crypto is dead camp and like going into trad things. And at this point, like, yeah, you either sort of get it and have some conviction, or you don't, or you're kind of just dumb enough to go in anyway, like the the left side of the midwit meme.
It's a really good time, though, for Urbit to pull in talented developers who don't see other ways that this works, and the ones who, and just kind of really pitch them on like, this is going to be a really hard, solid foundation to build on top of for like a very, very long time. So I think that those are the kind of people we should be attracting now. And like, yeah, Bitch will kind of mention this too. Like, yeah, I see it not happening like immediately, but I see like immediate ability to pull in more and more people on more like the developer side to kind of build out that experience. So yeah, I like kind of thinking of it as Tim Luck was saying, just thinking of it as like DeFi in like 2018, 2019. It's being built. It's going to be awesome. But it's, it's not there yet. So you track the developers, and then once it gets built, retail comes.
And it compounds, right? I mean, this is like one of the cool things about Urbit being such a good platform for developers. I say, as a recent Hoon School graduate, newly minted in the developer community, I personally will be building all of the future of Urbit. But the fact that it's so good for developers in particular means that this growth will be exponential, right? You bringing in those people makes tools easier to build, makes communities larger, gets users in. I think that even if it starts slow, the type of thing that Urbit is and the type of people that it attracts, it makes it really well positioned for long-term growth.
Well, I often tell people that the Network Age is the only other podcast that is sufficiently bullish on Urbit. But I feel like with four of us in the room right now today, it's almost like we're still being a little shy. Like we're almost still understating it, because it's like very likely there's going to be a DEX on a decentralized exchange on Urbit, like probably within a year, I would think, right?
Well, not only that, there will be DEXs are easy, but there will probably be like a CEX DEX. Like where you're doing like, a decentralized order book, like, like a CEX.
Oh, I thought you were going to say where you buy and sell and trade CEX. That would be kind of interesting.
I don't know. It's very hard to make those like real world links. And I don't know if that's like the path forward for crypto is like, they require a lot of human institutions, and it's not very scalable. So I know the humanoids like to copulate, but I'm not able to yet enable that.
Prostitution is, the oldest profession, and it'll be the last profession, right? I think, crypto can't get in the way of that market fit.
So Tim, when you say there's going to be a CEX DEX on Urbit, what you mean is like a decentralized exchange with a centralized front end, or what do you mean by that exactly?
No. Like doing DEX is probably the wrong word. Like I think we're people are working pretty hard on some like, order book type stuff, or like, actually exactly the types of financial products you would have on FTX, like futures, perps, and you can like do that better in a layer 2 context. There's some projects on StarkNet, on StarkX and others that are doing stuff like that, but we will be able to bring that. We're thinking of calling the project FTX because I think the name is free. So we'll see what happens.
I'm just gonna buy FTX.us right now, which just went on the market.
I think it's great. So so there's a lot.
Sponsor the Heat.
So
I was saying like it's all sort of pre-sponsored. Like whenever people watch Heat games, they'll like actually
I think they took the FTX down, right? Which sort of surprised me. I guess I had assumed
they left it up for a day or two after the crash. Like I don't know if it's still there or not.
No, someone posted a picture from their window of like the FTX stuff being removed from the.
Oh no, but on the post crash on the floor of a game, it still had the FTX.
Oh, nice.
We got. It's a very collector's item.
So Neil Run, you were talking before about the year 2030 and kind of thinking about the long-term future. Like from where we currently are, like what does this recent fiasco teach us about what to expect in the longer term? Like why does your mind go to 2030 and what do you see there?
It's just like I think it's looking at the Urbit roadmap. I think that's like a year that that a lot of like really exciting things will already be implemented by then.
So what's the craziest shit that you think we'll have in 8 years from now? Like on the 8th year, like what's going to ship on the 8th year? That's just like, holy fuck.
Yeah. So just first off, I think like a lot of the internet will be rebuilt on Urbit. And so that's like, I think this is just the foundation to build on. And so like, when you think of it, it's sort of like, when you just like take that for granted and you kind of picture ahead to that future, it's just like it looks really crazy because we've like moved off of these like monopolistic, really boring platforms like Facebook and Twitter into basically just like I think the most exciting thing is just like spinning up almost like the social AI where like communities can like spin up DAOs really easily and actually take the action that they want very easily. And that kind of relates to so I think the entire experience of being a human being will be very different in 2030 and how we're using the internet. And I think like, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to put it. It's just like today, there isn't really a way to implement your idea. It's like, okay, I want to broadcast this on Twitter and then I want to get you into maybe like a group on Discord, but then like you lose people there. And then it's like, okay, we're going to vote an idea, but then how are we going to manage the treasury? How are we going to connect voting from our community into moving funds? So I would just say like, overall, the entire being an entrepreneur will be much easier. The level of energy in a community, because it can actually take action, will be incredibly different. And so I think like, I think the entire experience will be awesome. It'll be like less like people just talking and way more like talking leads to an idea being implemented very quickly and kind of builds and cycles off of that.
2030, everything will be awesome.
I don't like 2030. Well, no, it's great. I get what you're going for. Just because like I've been thinking of 2030 since 2020, like where it's like the 10-year thing, and now like 2030 isn't that far away. It's like 7 years. So it's like it's getting closer to the point where like stuff actually has to happen in 2030. You can't use it that way. I'm actually like here for the near term journey. I really want to get more than people know, we already have like a developer flywheel going on Urbit, where, as I keep saying to people, like 2.5 years ago, it was like me and like 3 or 4 other people in the community, like as developers. And now it's in the hundreds and it's like growing really well. And there's tools coming very soon, not like, 4 years from now, but like a few months from now, that'll make that like way better and get it to like sort of par with Web 2, with the potential to accelerate, because that has so much other stuff you can do in terms of delivering apps and integrating crypto. That what'll kind of make me have a lot of fun is just like kind of riding that exponential developer curve specifically. And I think when we think about how fast Urbit could develop or crypto could develop, we're a little bit held back in our imagination because we're thinking of it in terms of how many people are there now and what tools they have now. And what I'm kind of hopeful for is in the next like year or two, which people enter who are just like incredibly productive, like incredibly ambitious, who just get stuff done using some of like, some new tools that are there much faster than we could imagine. So yeah, I kind of want to, I don't know. I don't usually say this. I'm a person who doesn't like to live in the moment. I think the moment is boring and like the future is better. And like sometimes I touch like atoms outside, like grass or like water, but I do in this case think it'll be fun to like enjoy the near term journey a little bit with regards to developers on Urbit, and that's what I'm most excited and bullish about.
Yeah, though I think there's a current moment where there isn't really a positive narrative that's being laid. And so I don't care if it's like, if you say 2030, or if to your point, you're just excited about today and the possibilities today, that's even better. But I think it is very important to really like why we're all so excited about Urbit, why we're all we all take Urbit somewhat for granted. And so I think like it's really important to kind of distill why that is more broadly to the public, and kind of really and take that position of like, this is going to be an awesome future. Maybe it's faster than 2030, but this is a great future.
Yeah,
like,
to clarify, I'm not trying to like, denigrate the 2030 thing, and I hope and expect it will be really good then. I just want people to like start having fun sooner. Everyone feels really bored. Everyone, crypto, tech, Stripe cucks, like all of our friends. And like, I just want them to have fun again.
Are you having
fun? I think it can be. I'm not having as much fun as I want. I'm like a little bit down, and I'm like hopeful that the fun can recommence in the next day or two. But maybe I need some more. I think if there's one thing we've learned from this is that the answer is like probably more stimulants.
Yeah. Have you gone outside today?
It rained a lot. I briefly went out. I wanted to mail a package, and like I stood in the rain for like a while, like waiting, because it was like, the store is going to open at this time after the siesta, and they decided just to not come back from the siesta, and so I came back here.
Italy, man.
You got to wait till you can send your package on the blockchain, and then we'll be having a lot more fun.
The question is how much Adderall would Urbit need to dominate a small country and have its own security force?
Adderall is not a strategic drug. So this is where I think like SBF like sort of mixed up like the wrong things, because I've done like heavy stimulants at various times to like get projects out, and like they really like aren't good for your creativity and strategic thinking. They're really good when you can like lay out a problem and just like bang through it, especially like in software. But I think they're not very good for that. And so the answer is
they help
like,
the fun problem.
Well,
temporarily exactly. At least
everything is good all the time. I think the answer is you would actually like not want Adderall in this case, and it would be the wrong drug. I think like this sounds really lame and old, but like I do think like glasses of like wine would be better for like contemplating strategy and doing it, because strategy is a much more like waiting and then pouncing like a hawk thing, as opposed to like stimming yourself up in the polycule with Caroline kind of thing.
I think
Sam, are you coming back to bed?
The stock price of many things is going down right now, and I would say in addition to FTX, the stock price of Effective Altruism is going down. The stock price of Polycules is going down.
If we can't depend on Effective Altruism and Polycules, like what can we trust to like take us out of the bear?
Well, go ahead.
I think it just goes back to just like people were really hoping that like crypto would achieve escape velocity this past cycle. Like everyone was really just like hoping that would happen, that like they wouldn't have to like care about the US government or anything or macro. They were just like, we're going to be incredibly rich, and we're going to
technical innovation. I mean, should we talk about the part where like especially Bitcoin maxis like are bored by tech, not interested in it, like don't want to innovate on it? There's like and I think like there's a subset of the ETH community that's much more technical, but there's a lot of people who are in crypto who like tech is sort of this like other thing, and it's not necessarily why they're there, and it's kind of icky to them that we're going to have to do this. But I actually just thought we really need to have a new Network Age member, or one of you guys converted to this, who's like unironically very into polycules, so that whenever we like make fun of them, we have to be a little bit uncomfortable and tread carefully and be like, well, all right, we do know that there's some benefits and it works well. And, in your case, we Sharon and Angela are
I made some agreements beforehand. Everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. And so we respect that, but we're not. So it would be great if we had that kind of sort of tension where it felt really awkward to make fun of polycules because of Nilrun's preferences.
Well, what's kind of strange and funny is there's a weird polycules are just content gasoline, basically. I don't know why, but I learned this when people love the concept of polycules. It really stokes their imagination and it makes people talk and share content like crazy. I lived in a shared house with some friends a couple years ago for about a year. There was this rumor, and it spread very widely. There was a rumor that my wife and I were in a polycule with them. It was totally false,
smoke without fire.
But a lot of people genuinely believe that, and to this day, sometimes people still ask me about it. So in a way, but I think it's kind of a good. It's a strategic meme in a way because it just makes people talk about your content more.
Yeah, and it's good. You were able to take your kind of your polycule experience and sort of turn it into this ironic thing where it's funny that it never happened, but obviously it did. So
well, I mean, okay, so I guess I'll let you guys go in a minute, but I guess one final question, or if there's any mileage here, maybe there's not, but it does seem to me that in these kind of associated cultural correlates, the stuff about the polycule, the stuff about SBF's effective altruism and his kind of hardcore rationalism and an obsession with kind of respectable mainstream political institutions. It does seem to me that these things are correlated in a meaningful way. And when I look at really more radical visionary projects such as Urbit, I see other similar cultural variables also correlated, but in the other direction, right? And on Urbit, I know a lot of the people building Urbit are Christians, whether they're Orthodox or Catholic or what have you. A lot of them are very pro-family, very pro-natalist, more into virtue ethics than kind of mainstream cosmopolitan rationalism. And so I don't know if you guys have an angle here or if you think there's something worth exploring or expanding on, but it does seem to me like these are clusters of traits that do have some kind of causal significance. Do you see something there, or what do you think?
I think it does. If you talk to a lot,
you're not going to like my angle.
Okay.
A lot of Urbiters are looking into leaving a computer that's a better computing experience for the next generation. Urbit takes a very long time to build. If you ask a lot of the core devs why they're doing it and how long they want this to last, it's the 100 or 1,000 year computer, and they're very focused on the next generation, be that their children or just people following after them. So I think when you're doing something as ambitious, where you're just basically redo the internet. You have to hope that you're doing it because you think it'll last a very long time. You're willing to kind of make an investment that might not bear any fruit for years and years. It's already been a while with Urbit, and that's why a lot of investors haven't been super excited about Urbit, because it's taken a while. But that goes to the mentality of the people. I would love to. I wouldn't really want to give my kids the current internet. I just don't. It's not really a computing experience that I think. That I'd want my family using. And so I think it's just going to that kind of long time horizon. And I think it affects everything about Urbit development.
Okay. Tim Luck, what am I not going to like?
Well, I was hesitant to just agree with you, because one thing I've noticed a lot in Urbit in the past year is that I would say that the profile you described was very accurate a year ago, and I think is less and less so now due to the very rapid growth. And I think I guess I'd say convergence with something like Ethereum has been pretty rapid, as much as I think some of the more original Urbiters maybe dislike that in some ways. So I think that's there. But I do think that what Nilrun said about, I do think that there is a difference in time approach between sort of I don't know what, essentially it's just internet rationalists who are often they range from they're not super focused on their legacy being a next generation. It's very often sort of this more utilitarian outcome for a broad number of faceless people, which is whatever, that's how they want to do it. But I do think that it's accurate to say that for better or worse, a large number of Urbit people, and probably the most influential ones, do see it in a more either dynastic or handing it on to next generations traditional thing. And I think that part is likely to last, because I think that that's also, well, I think it taps into very deep human things where people like, genetics to go on, and I think the rationalists are probably fighting against the current to some degree there in a way that makes it harder. And I think also that like the most sort of purist ideas in crypto are obsessively focused on the same idea of like that kind of longevity. Like if you look at, I'll just take like hardcore ETH maxis, much more than people know, are very obsessed with the idea of like the security profile being sustainable. Are we like, do we have paths for like quantum resistance? Is the issuance schedule like stable? Even Bitcoin's issuance schedule is like sort of makes them feel icky because they can see like, where it has problems. And so I do think that in that sense, in that very broad, like next generation sense, Urbit is very aligned with the most powerful trends in like crypto as a whole.
I think I don't necessarily disagree with some of what you guys are saying about the length of Urbit's vision, in a way that if you're building a project that is this large, you have to sort of take a different understanding of the time horizon of what you're building and what that means and who it's for. But I personally find a lot of the culture war stuff sort of associated with Urbit pretty uninteresting, and sort of really beside the point for what is interesting about Urbit, which I find, even as someone who's non-technical, really is in the technical details and what that offers, as opposed to sort of, I don't know, I think there is a decent percentage of Urbit people who have a little bit of a cultural chip on their shoulder and feel like they've created this new little utopian place for themselves, which I think actually detracts from the cool stuff. I don't know. This is beside the point of what is.
No, I think my answer was basically agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I think that like the power has been in that it's like sort of taken like, I guess, like the most powerful parts of that like impulse and stripped away some of the culture war stuff and tapped into this like general human next generation impulse, which is at odds with like, I think, effective altruism and like sort of, I don't know, Slate Star Codex rationalism.
Yeah, but it's not a political thing. It's just like a
that's right. I think it's successfully evolved by stripping like a lot of the political aspects, which 100% were there like a year ago. Like a year ago, Urbit was like the place for like based orthodox like weightlifting, like people who like to culturally position by saying they didn't like computers. And that's cool.
Yeah.
There's some like, nice people. But
the nice thing is I think will continue to use Urbit, but also everyone else will use Urbit. Like it's cumulative, it's additive.
Right. Right. Totally. Awesome. Well, for people watching this on YouTube or listening to it on the podcast later, these are the guys from the Network Age podcast. I'm actually, I can say in all honesty that I am a Network Age completist. I have listened to every single episode so far. It's a new podcast. Yeah. There's only about like 10 episodes so far, I think, around there. And I've listened to every minute of it. I actually really like it. There are not many new podcasts that I've recently become a genuine fan of, and the Network Age is one of them. So I think if you're a listener of the Other Life podcast or you read the newsletter, I think there's a very high chance that you will also enjoy the Network Age. So go subscribe to the Network Age. Tim is also the co-founder of one of the most exciting projects on Urbit. It's called Ukbar. It's a ETH layer 2 roll up on Urbit, and it's they have a big war chest of money. They're developing really fast right now. They have a lot of Urbit's biggest brains working on this. And in the next few months, you're going to start seeing people building, seamless composable applications on Urbit that use money as a primitive, thanks to Ukbar. And I think personally, as I said before, Ukbar is one of the many things on Urbit happening right now that I think is really going to turn heads in the next few months and hopefully pull us out of the current kind of crypto winter that we're probably entering. So if you guys have anything else you wanted to add, feel free to. If you want to add anything or if you want to shout anything out.
That's a way better summary of what we do than like what I do for summaries.
We've got a good episode coming out on Thursday with Rocco of Rocco's Basilisk fame, where we're going to talk about FTX as well as a bunch of other stuff and some AI shit. So go check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming on. I'm glad we got this crossover episode done. It was a long time coming. Thanks for shedding your insights on me and my audience. I appreciate you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, it was great.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Talk to you everyone later.